Jason Sherwood was the production designer for this year's Oscars, and he just got an Emmy nomination for his work. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Jason. And to start things off, you were also nominated last year for Rent Live, which you won for. You're nominated a second year in a row. What was this year's nomination morning like, finding out that you had gotten another nomination?
It was great. It was wonderful. Designing Rent Live was sort of a newer experience in my world as far as coming from a theatrical and a live performance background and being invited to play in the TV space. So to have that work be, celebrated, and we had an amazing team, and then to have it not be a total lark and a total one-off is very, very lovely. And, working on the Oscars this year was special for all of us. So it was nice to just sort of get to tap back into what feels like a long time ago with some good news.
Yeah. And when you got the job to design the Oscars, making history in the process, by the way, as the youngest production designer ever to do the Oscars, how did that all come about? Did they come to you directly? Did you pitch designs to them? What was that early process there?
It was so interesting because you think with a huge job like the Oscars, which is a gold standard job in, production design for television or live events, it's like a top, 3 job you could imagine. You would think it would be a very formal process, but what happened was I got an email from Lynette Howell-Taylor, one of our producers, and she and I and Glenn Weiss, our director, and Glenn has a huge history with the show and with live television in general. We just had a phone conversation for a few minutes, maybe on a Tuesday, and then they called me back on a Thursday and they said, well, would you like to do the show with us? And I said, absolutely. And they said, great. Our first meeting's on Monday in Los Angeles. So it sort of came about very, very quickly. And then I had about 3 days to put together some thoughts. So it was fast and furious and very informal, but very, very lovely. And the process sort of flowed as naturally as it began.
Well, your design for that stage was so innovative and grand. There's like that swooping 3-dimensional style that just, I think, immediately captures your eye. What was the thought process behind designing the stage in that way?
Totally. Glenn and Lynette came to me with a thought that they wanted the show to visually feel different than it had in years before, while still sort of maintaining the sort of polish and the integrity and the elegance of, Hollywood's most glamorous night. And I really wanted to explore what it would feel like if the moving images of the movies were exploded from a normal movie screen and turned into something that felt more representative of the way that they were. I think when I was hired, I had seen Parasite like that week in theaters. And I was just like, this movie is going to be enormous here. And the sort of cultural landscape of what we were going to have to celebrate and honor just felt more. And I kept doing this and kept making this motion, kind of like a cyclone, like a melting pot, like a sort of confluence of different ideas. And it just felt interesting to take a very presentational show like the Oscars and make it something that felt very 3-dimensional. That wasn't so much about, movies in a frame, because ultimately, films like Parasite, films like Joker, those movies were sort of inextricably linked to the cultural conversation this year and history making in some ways, on the night of the show. So I think to make something that felt environmental was intuitive to the idea of what we were presented with, as a culture of movie ingesters.
Well, actually, I'm curious, just before you started even working on the show, how much of an appreciation did you actually have for the Oscars as far as, watching them growing up and sort of the glamour of it all?
Totally. We were a huge movie family growing up and would do like Friday night movie nights. And I would force everyone to sit and quietly watch the Oscars my entire childhood. So getting to, be a part of it felt very full circle and very lovely in a lot of ways. And it was certainly special for my family to, have me have a hand in sort of making it. But I've been sort of a movie fanatic my entire life. So it felt a little bit like being utterly spoiled the entire time. But it was kind of perfect in that way to get to be a part of it. And it felt like, in a way, that was like the best homework I could have done. I was so familiar with what the show had to do and with what the show had done and the achievement of the show over the years that, I think the interesting thing about the Oscars is you are making a live television show that celebrates the movies that takes place in a theater. So it's in a strange way, and that has a ton of live music in it, depending on the year. And in our year, a ton of live music. So it ended up being this sort of like strange meld of a ton of things that I love, which, makes it super satisfying to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, I was reading about how you used like thousands upon thousands of Swarovski crystals. You had LED panels, so many different materials to create this effect that we eventually saw. Were there any kind of major challenges that happened along the way with that you maybe had to overcome working with all of that material?
Yeah, absolutely. It at the centerpiece of the design was sort of like a spiral shape. And it had video on the inside and a scenic treatment on the outside, and all of these crystals. And that piece would rotate and also fly into the air, and it weighed thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And it was a custom piece of machinery that had never been created before. And we basically asked our fabricator teams to put that together starting like mid-November maybe, and the show is in the first week of February. So it's just not a lot of time to not only make something special, but also conceive of how it can be made on our end creatively, and then in an engineering sense, and then to put it in the theater and have it work flawlessly on live television is like a fairly nerve-wracking series of events. But I think, the satisfying thing about it was that we wanted the technology and the old school and the sense of elegance brought to the project by, a partner like Swarovski, to have this sort of this feeling of, is that moving? Is it not moving? Is it a video screen? Is it a surface? Is it textural? Is there depth there? So we wanted the space to feel kind of like alive in that way. And hopefully we got toward that notion a little bit as the show went on.
I think so, absolutely. And there were a number of musical performances, as you said. There typically is anyway, but each of them had their own different color scheme and different vibe to them. People like Eminem and Janelle Monáe and Cynthia Erivo, Elton John, Idina Menzel. Like I remember in the stand-up performance that Cynthia Erivo did, it ends on a photo of Harriet Tubman projected on the background. And then the Frozen performance had all the ice crystals, obviously. Can you tell us about those little collaborations and making sure that each of those performances stood out visually?
Totally. I was so excited because when I came to the project, our producing team had sort of decided that a thing they were excited about was getting a lot of music into the show, and they wanted to have all of the best song nominees perform. And in addition to that, we ended up with an incredible opening number with Janelle Monáe and this surprise performance with Eminem, honoring the impact of music and the fact that Eminem hadn't ever performed that iconic song from 8 Mile on the Oscars the year that it was nominated. So it ended up being sort of, and we celebrated all of the best score nominees with this incredible sort of composed piece put together by our wonderful music director, Ricky Minor. So I think, I was so excited that it would feel theatrical, that the show would have a lot of music. The wild thing about the process on the show was, according to folks who have worked on it for years, it was the shortest turnaround time between beginning the process and the show itself, but it was also the shortest window between when the show was and when the nominations were announced. So the nominations are announced, and we have a sense of who might be in the best song contenders, but it's not until that day that we can get on the phone with all of these powerhouse legendary artists and their accompanying teams and talk about what we're going to do for Frozen 2 on the Oscar stage with a star like Idina Menzel and these international Elsas, with Elton John, with Cynthia Erivo, with Randy Newman, with Chrissy Metz. Like, we had to immediately figure out a way to support those performances with something beautiful and something that spoke to the song and spoke to, the event of them performing them live. But we had like 11 and a half seconds to do it. Quite literally, I think 5 days from nominations day to when we had to say, we need to push go on these ideas. So it was very, very fast, but it was fun because by then it was, mid-January, and we had been designing the show and working on the show for a while. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there were all of these unique challenges. And then, 2 weeks later, we're rehearsing them on stage. We're rehearsing Eminem in secret at night. It was an exciting time because everyone is a team, the art department, but just the entire team, the directing team, our lighting designers. We had to work really quickly to kind of adapt to those new ideas. And it was challenging, but it was thrilling at the same time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the team, you are nominated with Alana Billingsley, who was the art director. She's been the art director for the past few years of the Oscars. Can you talk about just your working relationship with Alana?
I mean, truly hellacious, just so difficult. No, Alana is an incredible art director, and we came to this project. We actually met for the first time last year at the Emmy Awards on the dance floor at the Governor's Ball. We have a lot of mutual friends. Her business partner is an art director named Krista Merlino, who I've worked with a lot. And we met on the dance floor and fell kind of madly in love, dancing our butts off, having a wonderful time. And I was like, oh gosh, I hope I cross paths and we get to actually make something together, because she's such a phenomenal presence. And then 3 months later, we're on the phone, and she's worked on the show before, so she gave me sort of a crash course in what needs to happen to a certain extent, and guided the process beautifully and ruthlessly and patiently the entire way, and was an incredible collaborator, and the number one person you'd ever want to be in a foxhole with. So it's wonderful to share the nomination with her, but even more so to share the process. And we had an incredible art department supporting us, and in that way, our part of the contribution in the production design is a substantial one, especially in that it's the space. And our team was wonderful and collaborative, but then even just the larger team and the way we interface with the lighting team and the video team and the directing team and the producing team and the Academy. And in that way, it was a wonderful collaborative process. And that tone was set by Lynette Howell-Taylor and Stephanie Elaine, who really gave us all license to be a team, which I think is more rare than you'd think when the pressure's really on. So it was a wonderful experience.
Well, I mean, as the Oscars are happening live, are you watching in the theater? Are you watching from home? I'm curious just what your reaction was, seeing all the fruits of your labor.
Totally. The sort of time that we were in the theater, which is substantial on the Oscars, you get a couple weeks to put everything up, and then you rehearse it for a few days, and then it just happens. Veterans on the show, Bobby Dickinson, who's designed the lights on the show for decades, and was a huge mentor on this project. He said to me, if they can give you tickets, you should sit in the audience and watch. So I took my best friend and we sat in the audience. We were in the 9th row, directly in the center. My mom kept seeing me on television and texting me during the show that she could see me on television. And I was like, you're bothering me during my show. It was surreal. It was wonderful. It was special to see all of that work come to life. It was special to be a part of a show that I'd admired. And I'm glad that I sat and watched it in live, because, it's recorded on television. We can return to it, but it was special to feel the energy of the room and to feel that community of filmmakers come together. It was an enormous year to have, people like Bong Joon-ho, people like Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, all of these mega filmmakers, Greta Gerwig, Laura Dern winning an Oscar. It was a phenomenal sort of experience to witness all of those people who operate at such a high level of their craft, receive those accolades and be a part of that on a thing that we had made, a lot of effort to make special. So it was a nice thing to sit and watch.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned at the beginning, you won an Emmy last year for your work on Rent Live. Can you take us back to that moment of getting recognized for your work, especially so early into your career as far as working in television?
Totally. Rent was like a passion project in every way. I loved that musical. I grew up on it. I was excited to be a part of it. The whole way through, we were taken care of in such a wonderful way. And I was allowed to really bring a lot of, myself and my team's identity to what we wanted to make. So, being recognized, period, and getting to go. I took my folks as my date, got to stand on stage and thank them, got to stand next to friends of mine and accept that award together. It was a very, very special thing. I think that the awards sort of circuit in a particular sense is a wonderful thing, because it promotes and celebrates the community of what everyone gets to do. But at its best, in a personal way, it's a moment to, stand up in front of people that you care about and say, thank you for putting me here, basically, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here and to have, shared a part of my own expression with a wider audience, with people, and make something that, hopefully moves people or reaches people in some way. So in all of those ways, it was a beautiful full circle moment. And then we partied.
Yeah. And then you partied with Alana, and the
I
rest
know.
is
I met
history.
Alana on the dance floor, and
There
then
you
the rest
go.
is history.
Yeah, it's fate.
Kind of,
um,
kind of.
yeah. Well, just going back to the Oscars as we wrap up here. I mean, this has to be one of the biggest stages you could possibly design in the world. Um, so, what will you kind of take with you from this experience as you're continuing forward in your career?
I think you underestimate how many people go into making a show like the Oscars. Even when like intellectually, you see a list of people's names, you understand, but really, there's a day where we sit down for one of our first full camera rehearsals, and you sit at this enormous table, and by table I mean dozens of tables put together into a rectangle, and then rows of seats of people who are in supporting roles in their various departments, and everyone goes around and says what they do. And it's sort of a staggering sense of teamwork and the coordination of it. And I think that I was personally blown away by what an act of kind of patience and generosity that is. And, there's something very, especially in this sort of wacky, tumultuous, difficult world that we live in, that everyone in that room was sort of moving and working to try and make a special thing together. And that the entire experience was warm and polite and generous. And in all of that, I think the thing that I take with me the most is that a huge genuine team effort can produce something as intended or as desired or hoped for. And I think that the coordination of that and everyone's willingness to really be a part of that team was the part that just blew me away and the thing that inspired me the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, thank you so much.
Thank
It was
you so much.
great to talk with you today, and congrats on the Emmy nomination. For those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more Emmy interviews, and head to goldderby.com to make your winner predictions.